On January 6, 2021, 2 months after Donald Trump lost the election, he held a rally near Capitol Hill.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
There were many different faces in the crowd that day. Trump supporters, sure, and also professional fighters. Former champion and UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich was there. He even posed for pictures with the far-right group, the Proud Boys.
We will stop the steal. Not going to let it happen.
Trump may have lost, but he was still Trump. He couldn't get the fight out of him.
Republicans are constantly fighting like a boxer with his hands tied behind his back. It's like a boxer. And we want to be so nice. We want to be so respectful of everybody, including bad people. And we're going to have to fight much harder.
The crowd would take the president's direction to march, peacefully and patriotically, to the Capitol building. Once they got there, things started to become violent.
We fucking disarm them, and then we storm the fucking Capitol. Huh? Fuck you! We ain't fucking leaving either!
The man you hear screaming here is Scott Fairlamb, a professional fighter and MMA gym owner. Not anymore.
A New Jersey gym owner sentenced to more than 3 years in federal prison.
Showing a New Jersey man verbally assaulting and then punching a D.C. police officer.
Fairlamb, seen here posing with a police baton and with a pepper ball between his teeth, received the harshest sentence yet for any of the January 6th defendants. 41 months, more than 3 years in federal prison.
This is the third and final episode of In the Red Corner, an audio series about the relationship between former President Donald Trump, the UFC, and the violent politics that unite them. I'm investigative reporter Karim Zidan, and in this series, I've been explaining why I believe the relationship between Trump and the UFC is concerning, and why, as the election comes to a head, this cage-fighting organization has the power to tip the scales. In the first 2 episodes of In the Red Corner, we explained how Trump helped the UFC in its early years, and spoke about the first Trump term and what the UFC had to do with it. But this final episode has to do with January 6 and its aftermath, how the UFC and its fighters have continued to support Trump despite the growing list of controversies, and how all this has given rise to far-right fight clubs that pose a danger to this nation. January 6 was an unprecedented day in U.S. history. It was the first time that a sitting president had attempted to overthrow an election, and it had repercussions on the fight world as well.
Our guest, Scott Fairlamb, is one of the January 6 participants, or as they call them, insurrectionists, I guess.
Yeah.
This is Scott Fairlamb being interviewed on the podcast of former UFC champion Frankie Edgar. Fairlamb is a former professional fighter and New Jersey gym owner. He comes from a family of law enforcement. His dad was a state trooper, and his brother actually led Michelle Obama's security detail. But Fairlamb, he was prosecuted by law enforcement. He was the first person to plead guilty to a federal case brought against a Capitol insurrectionist, and was sentenced to more than 3 years in prison for assaulting a law enforcement officer that day.
Your brother was in the Secret Service and served closely with Michelle Obama. She actually wrote about him in her memoir. So it's not like you have this hatred for law enforcement or reckless abandonment. So
Now, Fairlamb may have been a minor player in the fight world. He never fought in the UFC himself. But his political views aren't far from those who do, like Frankie Edgar. So Edgar invited Fairlamb onto his show once he was out of jail. The two know each other from the local Jersey MMA scene. They sat like old gym buddies, drinking beers and whiskey and shooting the shit. Fairlamb wore a shirt that read, "Kill your local pedophile." He told stories of kicking it with the Aryan Brotherhood in jail, He showed off his new tattoo of the Capitol building across his arm, and they talked about how Fairlamb reached a tipping point that would eventually bring him to the Capitol building.
Got down there, and I had posted something along the lines of like, this is what patriots do. You know, how far are you willing to go to defend freedom? When I stand up for something I believe in, all of a sudden I'm an extremist.
That's what they're doing now.
Right.
They're relabeling.
So my line in the sand has been drawn for years.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me an extremist. It just tells you and gives you a fair warning of what I stand up for.
And what are the things that he stands up for?
They're trying to kill kids. Indoctrination and the pussification
of America.
That's
good. I couldn't agree with that statement.
Hell yeah.
They're trying to literally make abortion normal. Like it's fucking normal.
12-month abortions. How insane is that? And they're essentially, right, they're harvesting organs. Essentially,
That's
what it's
at least the rumor.
Yeah.
I mean,
See,
it makes
I
sense.
haven't gone too far down that hole.
Yeah, no, it's well, I mean, you know, look at the shirt you're wearing. You went down some rabbit holes. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. So, yeah.
This may sound strange to those who don't hear this kind of rhetoric often, but it is more and more commonplace on the far right, where extremism and conspiratorial rabbit holes run rampant, and where mainstream fighters like Frankie Edgar find political refuge more and more. By the time the insurrection took place, the UFC had already become Trump's sporting arm. But in its wake, as a professional sports league, you'd think they'd create some distance from Trump to shield themselves from the fallout. And they did, kind of, for a bit. They wiped the documentary about Trump, the one titled Combatant-in-Chief that we discussed in the last episode. And on Fox News, Dana proclaimed that his organization wasn't a place for politics anymore.
One of the things that I've tried to do through this whole thing is stay out of politics. When people tune in to watch sports, they don't want to hear that crap. They don't want to hear what your opinions are, or who you're voting for, or what you're doing. They want to get away from everything in their life, and they want to focus on 2, 3, 4 hours, however long the sport is.
But this distance from Trump was short-lived. Here's Trump and Dana backstage at UFC 264, just 6 months after the insurrection, speaking off the cuff with top fighters.
Dana, here he is.
Hey, Jorge, I swear to God, he was just talking about you. He just walked up and was talking about you.
Great champ. Give him a lot of money.
And in his grand entrance into the arena, Dana wrapped his arm around the former president. The crowd chanted, USA, USA. At the press conference, Dana deflected.
No, I met him outside and walked in with him, and nothing, just he's a fight fan here to see the fights tonight. That's it. You know, I've been friends with this guy for years, and just two friends who are fight fans watching a fight.
Dana, how come
This was more than just two friends watching a fight. It was a way to soften Trump's image, to get him in front of young, impressionable fight fans, those who may not know a lot about politics, but who sure as hell know a lot about fighting. Here's Trump on an official UFC podcast with former champion Matt Serra.
Dominating with the grappling or the wrestling, just dominating. And the last round, he decided to just sort of take it a little bit easy and box. And that didn't work out too well.
No, it's such a game of inches.
Yeah, it is.
The whole episode goes something like this. It's Trump riffing on his genuine fight knowledge and fandom.
Well, I had a lot of Mike Tyson fights. I had more Tyson fights than anybody else, and I got along great with him. In fact, I saw him recently, and he could not have been nicer.
Yeah.
You know, he was always very nice to me and very good, but I had a lot of fights, and he was a draw. He could draw anything.
Trump benefits here not from discussing any substantive politics, but from revealing himself as a fight fan to the UFC's massive audience. And the UFC benefits from the reactionary politics of embracing Trump and his love of fighting. But when fighters embraced Trump, especially after January 6th, they did more than just soften his image. Take former champion Colby Covington, repeating election fraud lies to a sold-out arena.
Hey, anybody that thinks adversity in life, don't hang your head, just come back stronger from it. Just like Trump, he had a rigged election, but he's going to come back stronger. He's going to make America great again.
assault.
Then there's former champion Sean Strickland praising Trump after his match.
President Trump, you're the man, bro. It is a damn travesty what they're doing to you. I'll be donating to you, my man. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. Congratulations.
And there's also the popular fighter Bryce Mitchell. In a post-fight speech in 2019, he was prescient about January 6th.
And Reebok, y'all gonna have to kill me or make me some camo shorts because I ain't shutting up till then. And Donald Trump, I'm up here in D.C. If you need help whooping some politician, holler at me, brother. I'll do it for free.
There he is, your winner.
After Trump's insurrection, a new crop of MMA fighters emerged who supported this side of him, the insurrectionist side. And the thing is, they're not reprimanded by the UFC or Dana White. They gain in popularity and are booked for primetime fights. It's the opposite. They're rewarded by them. As the UFC has gone mainstream, this kind of behavior is emerging from the shadows. Publications like the New York Times have caught on and have published features on Dana and his political influence among the MAGA base. Dana leans into this base not only because it's good for business, but because, according to the Times, Dana White and Trump have the same base. Who makes up this base exactly? Well, for one, we already talked in our last episode about how fighting is generally a right-wing sport. It's also mostly male. Roughly 3/4 of fight fans are men. And according to the polls, with men, Trump has a substantial double-digit lead over the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, a lead which increases even more amongst those who identify as highly masculine. Hint, hint, UFC fans. Now, it's important to mention where this gender gap stems from. Many men today feel that society has shifted, that they're being overlooked and left behind. The research supports this. Young, working-class men of all races and ethnicities are less likely to, for example, go on to higher education, and more likely to die from deaths of despair, like suicide, drug overdose, and alcohol-related deaths. But rather than empower men with a positive form of masculinity, this gender gap has been exploited to promote politics of grievance and blame and victimhood, where progressive values like gender equality are pointed to as the source of these men's suffering. Here's journalist Sam Egan, who we've heard from throughout the series.
There are very real issues that occur in men's lives that I think it's hard for them to find a voice in sort of establishment media a lot of the time. But the thing that sort of always happens with these movements is these sort of figures accurately point at some of the issues that occur in men's lives. And instead of being the problem here is that you've been alienated from your fellow man and that you've been taught from a very young age to not feel, instead the issue is women and liberal society and the death of Western values. And so these people are redirected into these more and more extreme political ideologies because some of the only people talking about these issues that face men in their sort of day-to-day lives are political extremists, which is deeply unfortunate.
So these men look for a way out, for someone who represents their values, someone who can help reclaim traditional masculinity, about strength, individualism, and pushing back on oppressive cultural norms, to help them fight against, as Scott Fairlamb described, the pussification of America, to take them back to a time when men could be men and when America was great. Trump, Dana White, UFC fighters, they have become the masculine models for young, aggrieved men to follow. Strong, wealthy, successful, the archetype for what they can become. This isn't just some academic exercise. It's in plain sight. On October 26, 2024, both presidential candidates made their way to Texas. Kamala Harris held a rally with the Queen of Pop, Beyoncé, to talk about issues like abortion rights. And Trump? He sat down for a 3-hour interview with the king of the manosphere, the host of the world's most popular podcast, UFC commentator Joe Rogan. Rogan's viewers, by the way, are 80% men, and the majority between age 18 and 34. Not even a week later, The interview is closing in on 15 million views.
I have watched you for so many years. You're not a Kamala person. You're a Khabib person, but you're not a Kamala person. Nobody's going to know who Khabib is, but
they know who
he was not bad, right? That guy.
Oh, he was phenomenal.
But that's your kind of
Your
person.
weave is getting wide. We're getting wide with
Now, there are many ways that the U.S. can and should work to alleviate the suffering of these men. And also, ways that progressive movements can include these men rather than alienate and exclude them. But the shift of the male vote towards Trump is still concerning, because young men are attracted to Trump not necessarily based on policy, but on the appearance of power and authority, on the primordial appeal of the strong man. This strongman appeal applies to UFC fighters as well. Take former Special Forces soldier and gun rights advocate Tim Kennedy.
It's for freedom! It's for freedom! This is a squad automatic weapon, also known as the Saw! America!
As you may be able to tell, Kennedy has a tendency to play up his gun-loving persona for the camera. Bryce Mitchell, however, is just himself. Mitchell is who we heard from before, yelling into the mic asking if Trump needed him to handle some politicians. He also speaks openly about conspiratorial Christian nationalism on live broadcast events.
I brought this Bible in here tonight because I do believe Satan has taken over this earth. And something specifically I'm talking about is these fires in Hawaii. I don't believe that they were natural. I believe they were man-made. They're trying to take the land from the natives. And I want Dan Ige, a native Hawaiian, to lead this world in prayer against the power of Satan.
Well, congratulations on a great fight. Dan Ige, congratulations as well. Bryce Mitchell, Thug Nasty, tremendous performance, my brother.
Please let Dan pray.
Ladies and gentlemen, your winner.
This stuff is pretty far down the rabbit hole. But once you go even further, from the MAGA right to the far, far right, you find some pretty awful stuff.
We started late 2016, early 2017. And the reason we started was because the alt-right at the time, which, I always felt nationalist views was something I wanted to get part of the alt-right, and I just didn't see an opening for guys like me.
This is Robert Rundo. He is the founder of the neo-Nazi fight club called the Rise Above Movement, also known as RAM.
You had the Richard Spencer types. Everyone wanted to be an intellectual, walking around in a sweater vest and a tie. That wasn't for me.
Rundo is one of the biggest names in far-right MMA. He's been in and out of jail for crimes like plotting and engaging in violence at political rallies, such as the Charlottesville Unite the Right riots. You know, the one that had fine people on both sides. Rundo may not be an intellectual, but he is effective. He knows how to attract the right people.
How many high school kids do you know that are walking around in button-downs and suits? How many high school kids do you know that actually really attend political debates? Not many. How many watch UFC? A fucking ton, a shit ton do. So this is something you really need to think about. Think of something that's popular and in a way that we can make our own counterculture for it. So again,
in this promotional clip, Rundo is explaining how to create fight clubs like RAM, which is one of many of what are called active clubs, a term that he himself coined. Active clubs are a network of white supremacist, neo-Nazi underground groups that have proliferated around the United States, Canada, and even across Europe. They train in combat sports and run fight tournaments and host survivalist events and participate in things like the Unite the Right riots, all based on struggle, proto-masculine behavior, and wild fascist theories. Like that breakdown of order is imminent, like that they're training for the coming civil war so that they'll be able to take control. Journalist Sam Egan has reported extensively on the far right and has seen how these theories connect to fighting.
It's easy to see how someone who is consuming actively fascist philosophy would then turn, and reading books telling them like to wage war is to be free, to then be like, well, there's an MMA gym down the street. I can go learn how to fight people.
Rundo is the apex of far-right extremism. He's also the apex of identity politics, of disaffected men utilizing a violent sport to protect what they think is being taken from them, their race. So Rundo promotes things like the Great Replacement Theory, which is that Jews are flooding the Western world with minorities in order to genocide the white population. Now, it's important to note that Rundo started RAM in 2016, the year Trump was elected. Like other fascists and white supremacists, he saw Trump as an opening for his ideology, but he didn't think Trump went far enough. While he's surely on the right and is into MMA, in reality, Rundo couldn't care less about people like Trump and Dana White. He's more interested in utilizing his quote-unquote warrior spirit. Here's Sam again.
The warrior spirit is your spirit transcending through the process of combat. Through experiencing profound suffering, your existence is now essentially vindicated because you have earned your place on the planet, so to speak. They use warrior spirit frequently in active club discussions. The exact quote that I often come back to is, quote, "War breaks the routine of comfortable life. By means of its severe ordeals, it offers a transfiguring knowledge of life." So it's very much this idea of like breaking yourself and remolding yourself in the image of someone that almost deserves to live. Like you've earned your right to exist by engaging in the spiritual liberation of violence.
Now, Rundo may be enabled by the far-right politics of Trump and Dana, but he is not a UFC fighter. And no one from his active club network is one, as far as I know. But there have been UFC fighters that were neo-Nazis, like the former champ Sean Strickland, who we heard from before praising Trump in his post-fight interview, though he is a reformed one. There were also two German fighters, Benjamin Brinza and Timo Feucht, who were both signed and then promptly released from the organization once their neo-Nazi associations became apparent. And then there's the curious case of Jake Shields, a former title contender who is now making a name for himself as a white nationalist anti-Semite. When he hosted the far-right influencer Nick Fuentes on his podcast, they left the dog whistles far behind.
They call it anti-Semitic when you count how many of them run the media. They say it's anti-Semitic when you say that's disproportionate. They say it's anti-Semitic when you say that's a problem. You know, years ago, you know who invented the melting pot narrative about America?
A Jewish person.
Because only in that paradigm are Jewish people whose culture is different, tolerated, and are they allowed to, you know, take control of the government or the media, whatever.
It's interesting how much power they have. They're always meeting with everyone. I'm like, wow, these guys are super powerful.
Well, I get crushed by Jewish power. I get crushed by the ADL. I get crushed by the SPLC. I don't get a card to play, a victim card where I say, oh, racism, anti-Semitism, Holocaust. And all I said is it really...
Shields recently posted a poll on Twitter asking his 800,000 followers whether he should train with the white supremacist group Patriot Front, who are also associated with Rundo's active clubs. 83% of respondents said yes. There are a fair number of fighters, like Shields, that have gone down the far-right rabbit hole. And there's no wonderland at the end. Where they arrive at instead is the anti-Semitic common denominator which bleeds into many conspiratorial worldviews. They discover who they are. Here's the insurrectionist Scott Fairlamb on the Frankie Edgar podcast again.
They're starting with our children now. It's been going on for a while.
Bro,
like you made the point that people started paying attention during COVID. Now
it
we're
fucking
seeing
backfired on them. What's so crazy is that they, and I say they, and we know who they is, and I don't want to get into it, but
you can trace it all the way back to
it's
the
fucking
Rockefellers.
wild how now they're spitting in your face.
Teachers are saying. Teachers are boldly.
When Trump announced his candidacy for the 2016 election, no one took him seriously, except Dana White. And when he announced his candidacy for the 2024 election, everyone took him seriously, especially Dana White. Amidst this controversy and legal battles, Dana still found time to get Trump to come to UFC events. Remember the cheering crowds you heard at the beginning of this series? of Trump's first public appearance after his federal conviction?
Donald Trump is in the building, and the former president getting a standing ovation from the assembled masses.
Leading up to the 2024 election, Trump's UFC appearances have grown more and more frequent. The crowd's responses have become more and more raucous. Conservative media have fawned over this, because for them, the UFC has become a bastion for conservative sports fans. And Dana? He continues to deny he has any political intention.
I don't tell anybody how to vote. I don't tell anybody how to think. I just tell everybody my relationship that I've had with this man for 20-something years and who he really is.
Dana's claim that he has no political intention is hard to square with his behavior. Here's Dana at the Madison Square Garden rally speaking to over 20,000 MAGA supporters.
So, don't take my word for it, take hers. She will not change a thing. If you want to return to economic prosperity, border security, and global stability, you'll vote for the one candidate who's proven he can deliver all of that. You're going to vote Donald J. Trump as the 47th president of the United States. Thank you, New York. Have a good night.
Whatever Dana claims, this doesn't change the fact that his cozying up to Trump has real, tangible impact. Impact that doesn't seem to affect his business. Here's MMA commentator Luke Thomas, who you've heard from in our previous episodes.
If there has been a cost that the UFC has had to pay for this, I don't know what it is. In the short run, sponsors didn't leave them. The advertisers didn't care. The fans, obviously, there's been no rejection of this whatsoever. The fighters are almost completely on board, with exceptions here or there. And then, interestingly, the parent company doesn't care. ESPN doesn't care. Like, what would, like, if, in order for us to calculate that this has been some kind of mistake, we'd have to be able to identify the costs. I cannot identify them. I don't know what they would be.
Part of there being no negative impact for associating with Trump is because of their market position. Here's journalist Sam Egan.
There's three things at play here. Dana White, he recognizes there's tons of money to be made, catering to a conservative audience. He certainly seems to genuinely believe in the MAGA movement, to genuinely believe in Donald Trump. And also, he knows that there's nowhere else for fans to turn. Because the UFC owns the sport of MMA, essentially, if you're really, really into MMA and you want to watch high-level fighters do their thing, you have to watch the UFC. 90 cents of every dollar spent on MMA is spent with the UFC. It's a complete monopoly. It's a total monopsony, absolute regulatory capture over the sport. So if you want to have Trump on camera at a UFC event for 25 minutes, fans are mostly going to put up with it because there's nowhere else they can really turn.
Not only was the UFC not facing any negative consequences, Trump wasn't either. By mid-July 2024, his presidential campaign was roaring along. He had just floored then-candidate Joe Biden in their debates, which made clear the frailty of the sitting president. It seemed like nothing was going to stop Trump from reclaiming his throne. And then...
Take a look at what happened.
When 8 shots were fired at the former president on July 14th of 2024, something telling happened. As he was lifted up by Secret Service, his face bloodied and crowned in a frenzy, he raised his fist in the air and mouthed to the masses, "Fight, fight, fight." Dana posted the now iconic picture of Trump's fist in the air. He wrote that, and I quote, "The image perfectly reflects exactly the man I know Donald Trump to be. He is the toughest, most resilient American badass on the planet." Dana would speak at the RNC the very next week, his third time doing so. He was outdone only by the professional wrestler Hulk Hogan tearing his shirt off. Now, this podcast is being released just days away from the election, which means we don't have time to get into everything, like Power Slap and the ongoing antitrust lawsuit, and how left-wing UFC fighters deal with their bosses' politics, and so many more clips that deserve your attention.
Dana, I have an idea for you to make a lot of money. You're going to go and start a new migrant fight league. Migrants, only migrants. And then at the end of the year, the champion migrant is going to fight your champion. And I hate to tell you, Dana, I think the migrant might win. That's how tough they are.
Right now, though, I want to lay out my concerns clearly. By Trump embracing the UFC, a professional sports league owned by an entertainment management corporation, he blurs the lines between politics, sport, and spectacle, and he leverages the organization's cultural power, its fan base of mostly young, impressionable men. And by the UFC embracing Trump, they give credibility to someone who has no qualms about using power to control others, who has the support of some of the most powerful people in his country, and who has fighters on his side looking to liberate their warrior spirit through violence. This is not just a Trump phenomenon. We are living through an age of growing autocracy, where part of the new dictator's playbook seems to be buddying up to professional fighters, and, sometimes, employing their force. I've seen this all too often in my own reporting, like with Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov creating a state-run MMA gym, or Jair Bolsonaro tapping Brazil's MMA pantheon to obscure his cronyism, or Mohammed bin Salman whitewashing Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses by putting on dazzling blockbuster fights. Part of this strongman move is also about increasing kleptocracy. With the UFC, Dana really does like Trump, but he's also playing realpolitik. By flattering a president who can be bought by flattery, the UFC does its business only good, making inroads with a politician who has no qualms delving out favors to those most loyal to him. Democratic norms be damned. This is what concerns Luke Thomas about Trump.
He is, to a big portion of America, pretty fucking unpopular. So if he ends up winning, the question is, what do they do to the people who no longer like him? You know what I mean? Like, what do they do to dissent? What do they do to enforcing any kind of legal or otherwise codes of behavior that reduce the ability for Americans to express it? And to what extent does he use strong figures as a way to not only galvanize support for what he wants, but to present it in a certain light as well?
Sam Egan isn't just concerned about Trump. He's concerned about what comes next.
Trump has built a blueprint for conservative politicians moving forward to appeal to young, sort of pseudo-conservative, disaffected young men who feel like politicians don't understand them, who don't have their interests in mind. And he's found an eager participant in Dana White.
For many fans, the Trump-UFC pairing has come at a cost. Here's Luke again.
I get letters, emails, DMs from fans, sometimes once a week, sometimes several times a week. And it's a fan, typically a bit of a one that's been around for quite some time, 10 years or more, and they're throwing in the towel on their fandom. They'll repeat things to me like, I can't take the misogyny anymore, I can't take the racism anymore, I can't take the Trump advocacy anymore, and I'm out.
Luke is worried that, as time passes and more fans show themselves the door, this will only homogenize the UFC's base. As for Sam, he hasn't left MMA yet. But something about the sport just isn't the same anymore. It's not like where it all began, with UFC 1.
A very similar wash of like nostalgia and remembering kind of what drew me to the sport in the first place, because it gets harder and harder to be a fan every day.
You may still think that this is all overblown, that Dana White and Donald Trump are genuine friends, and that's the end of the story. That these extremist fighters who say awful things have just taken one too many kicks to the head. And that politicians, Democrats included, use athletes to bolster their appeal all the time. And it's true. Politicians buddying up to athletes is a well-trodden tactic to distract from real issues. But with Trump, it's different. He's a fighter. Fighters will fight for him. The threat of violence isn't empty. Hell, it's their profession. Here's Frankie Edgar on his podcast with Scott Fairlamb.
Would you ever do another one of these? Like, say there's another... I mean, this is kind of how I feel. They're not going to let this motherfucker win. Right? They're not going to listen. At what point...
They're going to kill him.
At what point does...
Yeah. That's the only way for him not to win.
100% going to kill
At
him.
what point does everybody do what you did? You know what I'm saying? like all the people that give a fuck about our country.
The UFC is becoming more and more popular. Nearly half of American adults say they like combat sports. Most don't pay attention to the politics of it all, like that it's taken on a new life as a refuge for conservative sports fans, as a space for young, disaffected, and sometimes extremist men, and as a stage for America's ongoing culture war that is playing out in this current election. Trump may not be a UFC fighter, but he has become a combatant in the fight for America's soul. And in this arena, the stakes are far higher than any championship belt. You've been listening to In the Red Corner. It's hosted by me, Kerim Zidane, and is produced by Ellie Blyer. This episode was scored using Blue Dot Sessions. Have any thoughts or questions, or things you think we got wrong? Head to sportspolitica.news and join in on the conversation. And if you enjoyed this podcast and want to continue supporting independent journalism, you can become a member of Sportspolitica for just $5 a month. So visit sportspolitica.news. That's sportspolitica with a K, .news. Thanks for listening. Until next time.